Diego Garcia, was built on a single assumption that no enemy in this region could touch it, and for years, Washington treated that assumption as fact. It was supposed to be unreachable. That was the entire point of building it. A strip of coral and jungle sitting alone in the middle of the Indian Ocean, 4,000 kilometers from Iran. More than 500 miles from the nearest battlefield, so remote that for decades, American military planners described it as one of the safest staging bases on Earth. The B-2 stealth bombers that obliterated Iran's nuclear bunkers in March 2026 flew from Diego Garcia. The B-52s launching cruise missiles into Iranian territory flew from Diego Garcia. The entire American air campaign against Iran was being run from a base Washington told the world was beyond the reach of any weapon Iran possessed. Iran had even publicly committed to a self-imposed missile range limit of 2,000 kilometers. Diego Garcia sits 4,000 kilometers away. And then, on March 20th, 2026, Iran pointed 2 ballistic missiles directly at it. Not in the Middle East, not at Israel, not at a Gulf base, directly at the most important and supposedly most untouchable American military installation on the planet, Yunnan. What happened in the seconds that followed changed every strategic assumption that every American ally in Europe, Asia, and beyond had built their security planning around. And the most terrifying part of this story is not what those missiles did. It is what they told the world Iran can now reach. Before we go a single second further, drop your location in the comments right now, your country, your city, wherever you are in the world. Unia. We have a global community watching this channel from every continent, and we want to know who is in this conversation today. It takes 5 seconds. Tell us where you are. You read every comment. Now, let us get into this. Because to fully understand what the Diego Garcia moment means, you first need to understand exactly what Diego Garcia is, and why Iran targeting it is one of the most significant military events of the entire 21st century. Diego Garcia is not just a base. It is the anchor of American global military power across the entire Indian Ocean region. The island itself is part of the British Indian Ocean Territory, a tiny atoll of 44 square kilometers that looks from satellite imagery like a horseshoe of sand, barely rising above the surface of the sea. But what sits on that horseshoe is extraordinary. A runway stretching over 3,600 meters, long enough to operate any aircraft in the U.S. military inventory, from B-52 strategic bombers to C-17 cargo transports to F-15 fighter jets. A deep water port capable of docking nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, and destroyers. Enormous underground fuel storage facilities. Radar installations. A satellite surveillance facility. Housing the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron. Prepositioning ships loaded with military vehicles, ammunition, and the equipment needed to stand up an entire division-sized ground force in days rather than months. And throughout the 2026 conflict with Iran, Diego Garcia was home to B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. The aircraft that carried the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30-pound bunker-busting bomb, into the deep underground tunnels of Iran's nuclear program. B-52 Stratofortresses launched AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles from standoff range. AC-135 tankers kept the entire air campaign aloft. The whole infrastructure of American air power aimed at Iran was operating from a single island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. A base the Pentagon had described in its own documents as an all but indispensable platform for security operations across the Middle East, South Asia, and East Africa. And there was another reason Diego Garcia felt safe. For years, huge. Western intelligence agencies had assessed that Iran's longest-range ballistic missiles had a maximum range of approximately 2,000 kilometers. 2,000 kilometers. Diego Garcia sits 4 kilometers from Iranian territory. The math seemed simple. The base was safe. It was physically beyond the range of anything Tehran possessed. Iran had even officially stated multiple times in diplomatic settings that it had voluntarily capped its missile development at a range of 2,000 kilometers. This was presented as a sign of Iranian restraint. New proof that Tehran was not pursuing truly long-range strike capabilities that could threaten European capitals or distant American installations. Eastern governments largely accepted this framing. Defense planners calibrated their threat assessments accordingly. Diego Garcia was categorized as outside Iran's threat envelope, not just barely outside it, comfortably outside it, confidently outside it, safely outside it. 3 days before Iran launched its missiles at Diego Garcia, Iranian officials told the world they did not possess long-range ballistic missiles. 3 days later, they fired 2 of them at a target 4,000 kilometers away. The sequence of events on March 20th, 2026 began in the early morning hours, local time. 2 ballistic missiles lifted off from Iranian launch sites. They were not the kind of missiles Iran had been using throughout the conflict. Not the Shahed drones, not the medium-range Fatah or Zulfiqar systems that had been battering Gulf bases for weeks. These were something categorically different. Israeli military chief of staff lieutenant General Herzi Halevi described them the following day as 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles with a range of 4,000 kilometers. 2-stage. That detail matters enormously. A 2-stage ballistic missile is not a stretched version of a medium-range weapon. It is a fundamentally different system. A 2-stage missile uses 1 rocket engine to achieve initial boost and reach the upper atmosphere. Then a second engine ignites to continue accelerating the payload toward its target. This architecture is the same basic configuration used in the earliest intercontinental ballistic missiles developed by the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 1960s. It is the beginning of ICBM technology, and Iran had apparently built and deployed one without ever acknowledging it publicly. The Wall Street Journal and CNN both confirmed through U.S. officials. What happened to the 2 missiles? One of them failed mid-flight. The airframe broke apart somewhere over the Indian Ocean, uselessly, turning the missile into falling debris before it ever approached its target. This kind of in-flight failure tells you something important. It tells you that Iran is operating these systems at the very edge of their demonstrated capability. Pushing a missile to perform at ranges and conditions it may not have been fully tested or refined for. Failure is a sign of developmental immaturity. Iran has the technology, but it has not yet fully mastered reliability at these ranges. The second missile did not fail. The second missile traveled its trajectory and was intercepted and destroyed by a U.S. AVSM-3 interceptor fired from a warship positioned in the Indian Ocean to defend the base. UK Housing Secretary Steve Reed confirmed the British government's assessment directly. Iran certainly targeted Diego Garcia. 1 missile fell short and failed. 1 was intercepted and prevented from reaching its target. The base was not struck. The base was not damaged. Here is the question that the entire world was asking within hours of those confirmations. It is the question Nobody in any official government briefing was answering satisfactorily. If Iran just demonstrated a missile that can travel 4,000 kilometers, even if it failed, even if it was intercepted, what does that mean for every target that sits within 4,000 kilometers of Iran? Because Diego Garcia, at 4,000 kilometers, is not the most strategically concerning point on that circle. Draw a circle of 4,000 kilometers around Iran on a map. Then look at what falls inside it. Every American base in the Middle East, every Gulf state capital, every Israeli city, Ankara, Athens, Warsaw, Berlin, Paris, Rome, the United Kingdom, nearly every NATO member state in Europe, the entirety of South Asia, large parts of Central Asia, and critically, American ships operating anywhere in the Indian Ocean that thought they were beyond the reach of Iranian land-based missiles. This is what Israeli Chief of Staff Zamir was communicating when he said publicly after the Diego Garcia launch. These missiles were not intended to hit Israel. Their range reaches the capitals of Europe. Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range. He was not speaking to Israel. He was speaking to NATO. He was telling European governments that the comfortable assumption they had been operating under, that Iran-esque missile threat, was a Middle East problem, not a European one, had just been empirically invalidated. And the intelligence dimension of the story makes it even more unsettling. Justi. CNN reported that Russia had been providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft throughout the conflict. Udrita Parsi at the Quincy Institute noted that Iran likely lacked its own satellite-based target intelligence to precisely locate Diego Garcia from 4,000 kilometers away. USEN, meaning that the intelligence guiding those missiles may have come from Moscow or Beijing, US. If the Russia-Iran intelligence sharing relationship extends to targeting data for long-range ballistic missile strikes on American installations, then the 2026 conflict is not just a U.S.-Iran confrontation. It is the first operational test of a trilateral Russia-China, Iran intelligence, and military cooperation framework operating against American assets in real time. Justi. Now let us talk about what the missile itself actually was, because the technical story is one of the most revealing parts of this entire episode. Hudson Institute Senior Fellow Ken Kasapoglu, who published one of the most detailed analyses of the Diego Garcia strike, identified 3 possible development pathways Iran could have used to achieve this range. The most likely candidate, based on Israeli and Western assessments, is a significantly modified variant of the Khorramshahr ballistic missile, a medium-range system that Iran has been developing and testing for years, based on the North Korean BM-25 Musudan design lineage. The Khorramshahr 4, Iran's most advanced variant before the conflict, had a stated range of around 2,000 kilometers with its standard warhead configuration. To extend a ballistic missile S range, the most straightforward engineering approach is to dramatically reduce the payload weight. A lighter warhead requires less thrust to accelerate required velocity, and the missile can therefore travel a significantly longer distance before its propellant is exhausted. What that means in practice is that the missiles Iran fired at Diego Garcia almost certainly carried a relatively light warhead, light enough to achieve 4,000 kilometers, but not the kind of payload that would do truly catastrophic damage to the base, even if it had struck it accurately. Expert Dr. Marcus Schiller confirmed this analysis, noting that a direct hit from the kind of very light warhead the Khorramshahr could carry such a distance would damage a building with a direct hit, but would not have much effect if, for example, it hit an airfield. A missile that can reach 4,000 kilometers is a strategic signal weapon at this stage of Iran's development. It is not yet a precision strike capability that can reliably destroy hardened military infrastructure at intercontinental range. But here is the critical distinction that the "it failed" and "it was intercepted" framing completely misses. The strategic significance of the Diego Garcia attempt has almost nothing to do with whether the missiles hit their target. In a conflict where Iran's goal was never purely military, where Tehran's strategy was built around information warfare, psychological pressure, cost imposition, and reshaping the political calculations of every country involved, the mere demonstration that Iran can point a missile at Diego Garcia and have it travel 4,000 kilometers toward its target is a strategic achievement of enormous consequence. The Hudson Institute's Kasapalu stated this precisely. Iran's decision to target Diego Garcia represents a calculated expansion of Tehran's operational strike geometry beyond the Middle East theater. Iran's abandonment of its stated 2,000-kilometer range limit is not an operational failure. It is a deliberate strategic declaration. Iran is no longer signaling restraint. Iran is signaling reach, and it is doing so under live warfighting conditions, which provides a level of credibility that no peacetime test could ever match. Think about what that means for the European NATO members that had been quietly allowing the United States to use their bases for operations against Iran. Romania had allowed use refueling planes and surveillance equipment to operate from its territory. The United Kingdom had initially resisted, and then, under Iranian pressure, you agreed to allow American forces to use RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia for specific defensive operations. These European governments made those decisions based on a threat calculus that included the assumption that Iran could not reach them. That assumption is now operationally invalid, not theoretically invalid, not based on some intelligence assessment about possible future capability, operationally invalid, demonstrated under combat conditions in the middle of an active war. Parsi told CNN that the attempted Diego Garcia strike suggests European bases that the United States thought were outside Iran's range may actually be within it. He added that he did not know if that would cause a rethink on the European side, but said it definitely increases the risk for them. When a senior American analyst says it definitely increases the risk, what he is really saying is this: every European government that has been hosting American military infrastructure aimed at Iran just discovered it may not be as safe as it thought. There is one more dimension of the Diego Garcia story that has not received nearly enough attention in any mainstream coverage, and it is arguably the most consequential of all. The missiles failed to hit the base. One broke apart. One was intercepted. The base was not damaged, and because the base was not damaged, the B-2 bombers and B-52s kept flying. The air campaign against Iran continued. The strategic impact of the Diego Garcia strike was close to zero in pure military terms, but here is what Iran learned from launching those missiles. Regardless of whether they hit, Iran learned that its two-stage missile system can achieve the range it was designed for, at least approximately. In-flight failure of the first missile tells Iranian engineers exactly which phase of the flight profile failed, and it gives them specific data to correct in the next iteration. The successful interception of the second missile tells Iranian analysts that the SM-3 can engage this type of threat at this range, but it also tells them the geometry of the intercept, the approximate launch position of the intercepting warship, and the parameters of the engagement envelope. Every missile Iran launches, whether it hits, misses, or is intercepted, is a data collection exercise. The 2026 conflict has given Iran's missile engineers more real-world performance data on their long-range ballistic missile systems than any series of peacetime tests could have generated. The Hudson Institute. Analysis noted that Iran's long-range missile development program has always carried an implicit terminal objective, placing the continental United States within credible strike range, a demonstrated range of 2,500 miles, in the Hudson Institute's assessment, is not an endpoint for Iran. It is a developmental midpoint. The pathway from a modified Khorramshahr, capable of 4 total kilometers, to a system capable of reaching the American homeland runs through incremental stages of engineering refinement, propulsion improvement, and guidance system development. Iran is now openly pursuing that pathway, validated by live combat performance data. The SIPRI analysis noted that, having successfully launched satellites into space using 2-stage rockets, it is not too surprising that Iran has been able to build on those successes to achieve longer ranges. Iran's civilian space launch program and its military ballistic missile program share propulsion technology, guidance architecture, and engineering personnel. The cased space launch vehicle, whose first stage is assessed with high confidence to use a Ghadr-class ballistic missile engine, has already achieved orbital insertion. The step from orbital insertion to intercontinental ballistic missile capability is, in technical terms, a matter of trajectory optimization and warhead survivability engineering. Iran is walking that path. Diego Garcia was a mile marker. There is a final political dimension to this story that deserves to be stated clearly, because it shaped the aftermath of the Diego Garcia attack in ways that continue to reverberate. Iran denied it. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei called the accusations part of a pattern of disinformation and labeled the strike an Israeli false flag operation. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the alliance could not confirm Israel's specific claim that the projectiles were intercontinental ballistic missiles. The United Kingdom confirmed that missiles were launched and that one failed and one was intercepted. But British officials declined to specify how far short the missiles fell, declined to identify the missile type, and they declined to make any definitive attribution statement beyond what U.S. officials were saying. This fog of official ambiguity surrounding an event that was confirmed by 3 separate governments, intercepted by a U.S. Navy warship, tracked by radar across 4,000 kilometers of ocean, and analyzed by every major Western defense intelligence service, tells you something important about the political complexity of confronting the full implications of what Iran demonstrated. Confirming every technical detail of a new Iranian long-range missile capability on the record in the middle of an active war creates pressure to respond in ways that could escalate the conflict further. Acknowledging the full extent of the threat creates questions about why intelligence assessments failed to flag this capability before the war began. Official. Ambiguity is sometimes the most honest thing governments can manage when the truth is inconvenient in multiple directions simultaneously. But the truth does not care about official ambiguity. On March 20th, 2026, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at a target 4 kilometers away that it had previously claimed to be unable to reach. One failed, one was intercepted. The base survived, but the distance was crossed. Range limit that had structured every Western assessment of the Iranian missile threat was shattered. Not in a laboratory, not in a test range, but in a live combat environment with global witnesses. Berlin is within 4,000 kilometers of Iran. Paris is within 4,000 kilometers of Iran. Rome is within 4,000 kilometers of Iran. And the next version of the missile that Iran is already working to build lighter, faster, more reliable, and designed to defeat the SM-3 interceptors that stopped this one, will not need a perfectly clear shot at an isolated atoll in the Indian Ocean to send the world the same message. It will have options that Diego Garcia never offered. The island that was supposed to be unreachable was reached. And in that reaching, even in failure, Iran drew a new map of the world, a map where safe distance no longer exists. Now, here is what we want to know from you. And this is one of the most important questions we have ever put to this community. Lucy, after everything you just heard, the 2-stage missile, the 4,000-kilometer range, the European capitals within the threat envelope, the Russia-China intelligence connection, do you believe the United States and NATO are moving fast enough and seriously enough to address what Iran demonstrated on March 20th? Or is the Western defense establishment going to file this away as a near miss and move on without the fundamental rethink that the Diego Garcia moment demands? Leave your answer in the comments. You want the full debate. Challenge us. Push back. Agree or disagree. This community consistently brings some of the most incisive analysis anywhere on this platform, and we want to hear from you, viewer. And if this video gave you information and context that the mainstream coverage missed or understated, share it right now before you close this window. Share it with one person who should be asking these questions. Every share keeps this channel growing. Every like tells the algorithm this story matters. And every new subscriber makes these conversations louder and more visible. Hit the like button, share this video, subscribe if you have not already. There is so much more of this story still to come, and we are going to keep following every thread of it. Thank you for watching. This has been presented by TGN.